Chapter 18, Guadalajara. Carlos drove south on the Pan American Highway. He kept his eyes on the road and did not relax his concentration at all during the long hours of driving. I offered to relieve him at the wheel, but he refused, saying that it was dangerous for the inexperienced driver to negotiate the curves on Mexican roads, and we needed to get to a large city as fast as safety would allow. As we drove, I had the feeling someone or something was following us, hovering outside on the passenger side. That feeling had made me so anxious that I had to struggle to keep my eyes open. I kept drifting off into a light sleep and found myself back in the Sonoran desert floating over the chaparral. I could see rows of enormous agave cactus and clusters of tall saguaro, and the long brown lines of irrigation ditches. I knew something was wrong. I felt vaporous, as if I had no substance, or that the bulk of me was somewhere else. When I was awake, I was disoriented. I couldn't think and could hardly formulate a coherent answer to Carlos's questions. He was asking me about my studies, what courses I planned to take in the fall. That world was so distant that I couldn't remember the course titles, the professors' names, or people I had had contact with at the university. I was tripping over my words as if I were drunk or had a speech impediment. "You sound like my Turkish grandmother," Carlos said. She would always mix up her P's and B's and twist words around. I used to be ashamed of her because I thought she had a heavy accent, but later I realized that she had aphasia. "Well, I don't have aphasia," I said, annoyed. "I just can't seem to focus my thoughts." Carlos turned off onto a shoulder of the road, stopped the car and examined my pupils. He concluded that La Catalina had gotten a strong hold over me and that she wasn't about to let go. "What does she want with us?" I asked, my teeth chattering from an inner chill. "Your sudden visit and suspicious behavior was interpreted as an attempt to snatch her power," Carlos said. "She acted in the only way she knew how to defend herself from an inexplicable force." Carlos reiterated that we had to put even greater distance between us, and quickly too, for we had offended La Catalina by not making it plain who we were and why we had come to see her. "Why would she want to hurt us if she is part of Don Juan's group of sorcerers?" I asked. "It's not a question of what La Catalina wants," Carlos explained, "but once certain forces are set into motion, there is nothing she can do to retract them. It is like the recapitulation. Once your intent and breath are sent out, whoever happens to be in its path is done for." "Do you think she might retaliate against her will?" Carlos started the car again. "There's no way of know what she might do," he said. "Therefore we must continue our journey and rally our power." When I asked Carlos how far south we were fleeing, he said we would keep driving until we ran out of power, or until something told us to stop. I had the gnawing suspicion that I had already run out of power. From the time of the gathering in the house in Sonora where the fleas had attacked me, to the encounter with La Catalina, things had not turned out well. I rationalized these ill-fated outcomes as a result of not having been adequately prepared as to who these people were, or what I was to expect. Had I been better informed, I would have handled the encounters with more finesse. Yet at the same time, I knew that in the sorcerer's world the test of a warrior's mettle always came disguised, to see if one could act impeccably without warning or preparation, but simply from an inner conviction. It was late afternoon by the time we reached Guadalajara. Carlos parked the car near the Hotel de Mendoza, near the long park-like Plaza Tapatia. We got out and walked to an area where there was a gazebo set on a raised platform with steps leading up to it that served as a stage. An orchestra had assembled. The musicians seemed to be preparing to play, for they were warming up their violins and trumpets. A good-sized crowd had gathered to hear the concert and to stroll along the walkways of the park. Massive colonial-style buildings surrounded the park. To the west was the Digalado Theater, the home of the Philharmonic Orchestra of Jalisco. Further on we could see parts of the government palace. Streets veered off in various directions from the central plaza. To my left was an enormous building with carved wooden doors opening to a series of steps. It seemed to be a government building of some kind with a statue of a man riding a horse in front of a fountain. Carlos wanted to head for the statue. "Can we stay to listen to the concert?" I asked. Carlos nodded. We looked for a bench where we could sit and listen to the music, but they were all occupied by families and young couples. I realized we were not in the best spot to listen to the orchestra. The place was packed with old men with walking sticks, grandmothers looking after boisterous children, and young women who were parading before the appreciative stares of young men. The paths were crowded too with vendors selling balloons, artificial flowers, and pinwheels. Other stands and carts were selling cotton candy, fruit, ice cream, and all kinds of wares, including canaries in small cages. We stood for a while waiting for the orchestra to begin. In the distance I could see the twin towers of the cathedral. It was a striking mixture of Byzantine, Gothic and Arabic styles. Carlos said that the 200-foot towers were erected in L848, after an earthquake had destroyed the original structures. The towers were beautifully decorated with yellow and blue tiles that glistened in the afternoon sun. In the opposite direction, across the park, east according to my compass, there were 3-story houses with bars covering the windows. Flowering geranium pots and other plants graced the second-story balconies accessed by beautiful French doors opening out to them. One house in particular caught my attention. Its shutters were freshly painted blue. It seemed to exude vitality from every stone. Compared to it, the other houses seemed drab and old. "The orchestra is about to start playing," Carlos said, taking my arm. "Shall we walk around the plaza to find a better spot?" We began to stroll, but I grew more and more uneasy. I had the unsettling sensation that I was being followed or that someone I couldn't see was watching me. I grew self-conscious, irritable, for I knew whoever it was scrutinizing me at a deep level. I had all but forgotten La Catalina in the excitement of the park, but this was something else having nothing to do with La Catalina's reprisals. I looked at the people seated or the ones standing on the benches so they could see the musicians, but I didn't recognize anyone. I saw children with their mothers, teenagers out on dates, an elderly woman and a gentleman. Then there was a strong and attractive middle-aged woman, carrying a mesh shopping bag full of parcels. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The band had begun playing. They sounded out of tune. They were playing the Vienna Waltz by Strauss, which had been one of my mother's favorite pieces. She had played it over and over on the piano so that it had become ingrained in my memory. I was mulling over as to how it ought to be played when a man approached Carlos and began talking to him. At first I didn't pay any attention, for I was engrossed in finding fault with the musicians. But when I turned and saw the familiar face almost completely hidden by a sombrero, my mouth fell open. "Emilito!" I cried. "What are you doing here? Is it really you?" We stood there for a moment, staring at each other. Tears came to my eyes, for I had thought I would never see him again. Indulging as usual, he said and winked devilishly. "Have you been practicing what I taught you?" "I haven't been," I confessed, "but I am going to the university as you recommended." Emilito nodded. He whispered something to Carlos, who suddenly excused himself, saying he had an errand to run, but that he would join up with us later. I was so happy to see Emilito that I barely heard what Carlos was saying. I started to follow him as he left, but Emilito grabbed my arm to stop me. "Let him go, dear. Don't you like my company?" He sounded actually peeved, like a child who was about to be abandoned. He prodded me in the opposite direction toward another bench, some distance away from the orchestra. I turned to see if I could catch sight of Carlos to ask him not to leave me alone in an unknown city, but he had already disappeared in the crowd. "You'll see him later," Emilito assured me. "Now what about your practice of stalking with the double?" "What do you mean?" "Stalking with the double," he repeated with an exasperated click of his tongue. "Have you been practicing it?" I was at a loss as to what to say. I tried to remember what he had taught me with respect to that subject, but my mind was a mass of confusion. I looked at his wide lemur-like eyes and noted the disappointment in them. I wanted to say that I understood what he meant and that I was practicing diligently every day, but that would have been dishonest, so I said, I don't honestly know if I've been stalking with the double. He recommended that I lean back, on the bench, close my eyes and try to remember what he had taught me on that subject. Remember how to find things, how to get things done, how to move things with a force stemming from inner silence and beyond, he suggested. I closed my eyes and tried to settle my erratic breathing. Then as I drifted off into a restful state, I remembered something that Emilito had said long ago while I was living in the trees under his care. I had complained that since I could not leave the treehouse, which had been our agreement, I was unable to practice the martial art forms Clara had taught me. For that I needed plenty of space and preferably a hardwood floor. Practice martial arts with your double, Emilito had recommended. That's the best sort of practice anyway. How do I practice martial arts with my double when I can't even leave the treehouse? I asked. Emilito had laughed and to my amazement had executed a series of the most graceful and impossible bodily movements I had ever seen. Right there beneath the treehouse, Emilito had flipped backwards and then laterally in circles, rotating his body in a horizontal plane like a frisbee, and I knew he wasn't using pulleys or ropes, or extra fast film to speed up his movements as they did in martial art movies to give the impression of actors defying gravity. Watching Emilito's superb movements from the treehouse was sheer delight. Why hadn't he taught me before? I lamented. Now that I couldn't leave the trees, it was too late to learn how to spin in the air. Practice these movements with your double, he had repeated and again showed me the lateral spinning motion. But how do I practice that without falling out of the tree? I had asked. Use your imagination and intend it, he said. Intent. Intent. Intent, he called out in a shrill bird-like squawk as he walked toward the house. That night and all the subsequent nights for several weeks, before falling asleep, I visualized the movements Emilito had demonstrated. I saw myself doing them over and over until I found myself doing them in my dreams. With some practice, my dream body could move any way I willed it to. I found I could do the most elaborate flips and back bends. I could leap from the ground to the treehouse and back down again in a single bound, using not pulleys and ropes but the energy from my midsection, and I could do a thing I had always wanted to do, but could never accomplish with my waking body, no matter how hard I stretched, and that was touching my chin to my toes. After that, Emilito would show me movements on a regular basis, which I would then practice first by visualizing them, and then by repeating them over and over until I could do them in my dreaming. I opened my eyes and told Emilito what I had remembered, that while I was in the treehouse, I practicing long sequences of movements, putting the gravity-defying techniques that he had shown me, together in new patterns, so that every night I would dream of doing combinations of movement. That's stalking with the double, Emilito said, pleased. That's sending out the double as a scout to put things in order. Then when you do it, it's a cinch because the energy has already been deployed to produce a certain effect. The rest follows by itself. I realized that in spite of my reason, that was the way I did practically everything, from practicing martial arts movements, to writing a term paper, or giving a report in a class, or designing a dress, or composing a poem or cooking a stew. Following the pattern I had learned under Emilito's tutelage, I always set up the form at night, in a quiet restful state. I laid the foundation and imagined myself going through the motions of doing that particular thing. For example, if I were going to make a dress, I would go through all the steps in the exact order I needed to do them. I would see myself selecting the proper material, folding it, cutting it, taking the pieces in their proper order and sewing them together. I would see which way would be better and make changes if I needed to, repeating the sequence in a different order. A voice would tell me if there was a better way of doing it, and when I had it completed, in the most economical and efficient way, whenever I felt it was the proper time, I would allow the activity to unfold to its completion. It was as if the thing was already done and I was only the agent, silently going through the motions of its execution. The same thing would happen if I had to give a report in one of my classes. I would visualize myself writing the paper while in a light sleep. Or rather, I would blank my mind and something would isolate a topic and tell me how to organize it in the most precise and understandable manner. When it was arranged, I would put it down on paper exactly as I had written it with my dream body. I realized that the years of recapitulation had enabled me to visualize in detail entire scenes and long sequences with no difficulty at all. Something would tell me what to say or do and I would see and hear myself saying and doing it. Then when it came time to give the report, or do the activity, I proceeded as if it were already completed. Stalking with the double comes in handy when you're going to school, Emilito said after I had explained to him how I proceeded. It bypasses thought and goes directly to the source of energy that enables us to act most efficiently. I guess I do use intent, I said. If I need to find something, like a specific blouse to match a skirt, say out loud I need a blouse, or find me the perfect blouse, and the force out there puts it in front of me by making me encounter it sometime during the course of events. I don't have to do anything. It brings it to me. Emilito said that was the art of stalking, to reach the point when one does nothing, but allows the power of intent to alter reality so subtly that the intended items appear as elements in one's daily life. It is a harmonious process of changing perception via the force of intent, something so mysterious and subtle that it seems as if it comes out of nowhere. Emilito stressed that force only responds if one is impeccable in one's daily life, and if one has no attachment to things. Feelings of desperation, or clinging or greed or need will thwart the free-flowing energy required for intent to respond to one's silent bidding. You must not be that unimpeccable, Emilito said, if you can stalk with the double using the power of intent. Or perhaps you are the apple of someone's eye and someone is lending you their power. What do you mean? I asked. Who would be lending me their power? Nalita? I'm not talking about Nilda, Emilito said. She watches over you, to see that you don't stray from the path. This sounds like something different. He sniffed the air a couple of times as if trying to determine something. In fact, he sniffed in all directions as if he were smelling something intangible. What are you doing, Emilito? I asked. Did I forget to put on deodorant this morning? I wouldn't know about that, he said. I'm interested in determining who is lending you their power. Perhaps it's Mr. Abelar, the Nawal Juan Matus, or the new Nawal, Carlos. Juan Matus is your teacher, true, Emilito said. But he is pretty miserly with his power. He wouldn't lend it for the hell of it, and Carlos is in charge of leading you to freedom, but this smells like something else. Like someone has made you a gift, and you don't even know it. All of a sudden I was afraid, sensing something that was beyond words. It was so dark that it came from the darkness itself. Someone has been teaching you things at night, Emilito announced like an oracle. And I know who it must be. Who, Emilito? Tell me. It's not up to me to spill the beans, he said. If your true benefactor wants to reveal himself, then so be it. If not, let it remain a secret. At the mere mention of the word secret, I registered a chill. My whole body shivered from the marrow of my bones outward. I experienced what Don Juan had called the warrior's shiver. He said it happened when a force moves the ethereal body directly and so powerfully that it is then registered by the physical body. Can't you tell me who you are referring to, Emilito? Now I'm scared to even go to sleep at night. And you should be, he said seriously. Someone has been showing you how to manipulate intent, but not merely from the treetops, but from the deepest levels of the beyond. So how come I don't remember or even know what you're talking about? I asked, and how come I'm still such a shitbird? Because that someone is teaching your double directly. Very sneaky. He must come while you're in a profound sleep. That's why you don't remember, and that's why you can afford to be so indulging. If you had a bit more energy you would be aware and you would know who I'm talking about, because you double already knows him intimately. Him? Is it a he? I had still thought it might be Nalita, but whenever she comes in my dreams, I am usually aware of her presence. There is nothing secretive about her. On the contrary, she is open and light-hearted, almost to the point of being nurturing in an indifferent sort of way. This other force sounded all too sinister. I didn't relish the idea that someone or something was manipulating my energy in my sleep, and especially not a male figure. Sinister is right, Emilito said with such an exaggerated warrior's shiver that his body vibrated from head to toe. It was so comical that I laughed out of sheer nervousness. The real mystery is why would he be all that interested in the likes of you? I don't know what you are talking about, I said. Nobody is interested in me. That's just the trouble. I'm really an inconsequential piece of shit overlooked by everyone. I said that with all the self-pity I could muster, for I felt I had been abandoned by Emilito, Nalita, Clara and Don Juan. Now, tree dweller, let's have none of that self-pity crap, Emilito said with a nudge that almost pushed me off the bench. No one abandoned you. You have your own path, and it's not here with us. Whatever we teach you has to be to your dream body or double, and you don't have to be in Mexico for that. Why not? A stupid question, Emilito said, because as you know very well, the dream body is not bound by space and time. We can meet anywhere and any time, even the city of the angels. The way he said that had made Los Angeles sound utterly enchanting. I know that, Emilito. What I meant was, why do you have to teach the double? Why can't you just teach my physical body directly, the way you used to? Why can't I stay here in Guadalajara with you? Emilito gave me mock look of horror. What do you have in mind, he said, moving to his side of the bench, and what makes you think I ever taught your physical body? Do you know something that I don't? No, I don't mean it like that. I know you're beyond all that male-female crap, and so am I. I just don't like being in Los Angeles by myself so far from all of you. You are not by yourself, now that you have met Carlos, the young Nawal, Emilito said. He will look out for you, and the rest of us are always aware of your presence. You mean you see me? Of course, we see your energy body, and we know your innermost thoughts. He raised an eyebrow and shook his head, so you'd better continue recapitulating. The stronger your intent gets, the purer you have to be. I told Emilito about something that had been troubling me. I had a part-time job in a typing pool while going to school, and every time I parked my car to go to work, a young man, slightly retarded and perhaps homeless, would be waiting on the corner asking if he could clean my windshields for some money. For a while I simply let him clean them and gave him a few dollars in return, but since I drove there 4 or 5 times a week, I didn't need my windshield cleaned each time, so I would say, no thank you. Sometimes, I felt sorry for him and gave him some money anyway. Especially after he had told me he had to be careful about what he ate because he suffered from stomach ulcers. The thought that he had bleeding ulcers, the way my older brother had as a teenager, made the situation all the more poignant. I wanted to give him all the money I had, yet at the same time I was on a tight student's budget and had to watch what I spent, and I didn't want my windows cleaned, so I was at a loss as to what to do. It got to the point that I dreaded driving up to the parking lot of my work, for I did not want to see this person. To avoid encountering him, I went so far as to park down the street, but he would find me anyway on my way home. He would say, "There's my lady friend," in such a pleasant tone that made me feel like a rat if I didn't give him any money, and angry if I did. I became so guilty and annoyed with this routine that one day I stopped in my tracks when I was out of sight, and said in a loud voice, "Enough is enough, I don't ever want to see that person again." The next day I was relieved to see that the young man wasn't on the street corner, but I didn't think anything of it, expecting to see him there the next day, but I didn't. I thought he was on vacation, although where or how I couldn't fathom. After a week of not seeing him, I was afraid he might be ill and felt doubly guilty. As time went on, the young man didn't return. In fact, I never saw him again. When I finished my account, Emilito shook his head. Now I'm certain that someone has been teaching you to stalk with the double. Those things don't just happen just like that. What do you think happened to that man, Emilito? I asked, feeling alarmed. Why didn't he ever come back? It makes no difference what happened to him, Emilito said. He may have gone on vacation the way you would have liked to believe, or maybe he was hit by a car while washing a windshield, or perhaps he moved to a street corner where business was better. Or maybe he died of his ulcers or of malnutrition. Whatever happened to him is not the issue here. What are you saying? I asked. What is the issue? The fact that you never laid eyes on him again means that you were capable of altering the flow of intent. By voicing your desire, you moved something. Your intent moved that young man away from that street corner. How or to what it was moved makes no difference. I didn't want him to come to any harm, I protested. I just didn't want him to keep bothering me. You yourself said that a stalker should never be subject to routines, and giving him money every time I saw him was a routine. That's precisely what I'm saying. You were able to disrupt a routine by altering the flow of intent. That is stalking with the double, and someone has been teaching you how to do that. I still don't think it had anything to do with me, I said. It could have been coincidence. He probably had somewhere else to go. Call it coincidence, witchcraft, sorcery, or whatever you like, Emilito said. The point is that you never saw the young man again. Who gives a fig what the reason is or what explanation you want to use? Your uneasiness is an indication that you had something to do with it, whether you are aware of it or not. Who do you think is teaching me this? I asked, still not convinced. I already told you it's not for me to say, he replied. But there is another secret that I can reveal to you, if you follow me. I'd rather wait for Carlos to come back, it's all the same to you, I said, afraid of what Emilito might reveal to me. The orchestra had stopped playing long ago. Emilito popped up from the bench and said we could not wait for Carlos to return. It was getting dark and he wanted to take me to meet his friend who lived in a house nearby. He pointed to the west and said that if we craned our necks, we could see the house from where we were standing. I could see the corner of a wooden balcony. It was only a bit of railing that showed, and the rest was covered by the adjacent buildings. To my surprise, he was pointing to the house behind the one on the corner, the house that had the balcony with flowers, the one I had liked so much upon arriving at the plaza. Who lives there? I asked, and are you sure Carlos will be there waiting for us? A beautiful lady, Emilito said, and I'm absolutely certain Carlos will be there, but will he be waiting for us? I very much doubt it. He's probably enjoying himself too much. He said that with a wolf-like wink that implied all sorts of devilish things. I experienced a wave of jealousy that was too obvious to hide. Emilito shook his head, for he knew he had hit a sore spot. From his chuckle, I could tell he had been deliberately putting my claim to being detached as a woman to the test. I failed miserably. We walked to the house in silence. He had such a sprightly, sure gait that I had to make an effort to keep up with him so I would not get lost in the crowd and end up in an unknown place. Along the way he said that he had something that he wanted to show me, something only for the eyes of the double or dream body, and that we had to hurry for twilight was the best time to witness such sights.